For centuries, Indians have believed in a creature that was half man, half wolf.
Each victim was ripped to shreds.
Friday,
Oh my God.
the legend returns to kill.
What did you see?
Don't miss the X-Files, Friday at 9, 8 Central.
Welcome to this week's X-Files review. So this is going to be the 19th episode of the first season. It is called Shapes, and if there was any doubt, that promo and that clip I just played you gives away. We are in Indian territory, Native American, for a good old-fashioned werewolf plot. Even though the episode dances around it, that's exactly what we're dealing with here. So the setup is that there's a blood dispute between, essentially, now this sounds more cliche than it actually plays out in the episode, but it's kind of cowboys and Indians almost, if you want to reduce it to his sort of bare essentials. But we get this setup, shadowy silhouettes at night, where essentially, yeah, there is vengeance taken on this ranch, where essentially the brother of this ranch family is attacked and killed, but later on it becomes clear that there's a non-human entity at stake. They basically blame it on the other side because there's, as I said, a land dispute, a blood dispute, and it soon becomes clear that we are dealing with werewolf, where the brother has been bitten and he becomes a werewolf essentially, and they do dance around that a lot. And we get into the whole Native American mythology. Now, American TV shows, particularly from that era, or this era, doesn't have a particularly good track record when dealing with Native Americans, Indians. They rather stereotypes them. I think a good example is in the Roswell episode River Dog from season 1. That's a horrible example. I think arguably this does it a bit better. Now, I did hear listening to another podcast. Shout out to the X-Files Revisited, excellent podcast. You can find it on YouTube, the episodes. They're about the same place as I am actually, but a bit ahead. But yeah, recommend them. Actually, one of the guys from that show did point out that Native American culture is something that Chris Carter is interested in, so he's done his research, and so I think that's worth considering. So actually maybe some of this stuff we see in the episode is accurate, but I think just watching from my perspective, it did seem like a lot of stereotyping of Native Americans. At one point, because they're obviously mourning the dead, so basically you get like a ceremony and there's a lot of chanting and all the rest of stuff you feel is sort of stereotypical, and but maybe take that on red, and that's quite true. They definitely linger on it a bit much, and I think the episode, it doesn't quite get the right balance. I think it still deals in quite broad strokes. I think it's still, you get a lot of the kind of, these Native Americans don't trust the FBI, and there's some good ideas in there that's kind of introduced quite early. Then it's almost like a political thing where they just feel they get forgotten about until there's an incident like this which catches the FBI's attention. So some of that stuff is actually quite interesting, but some of the other stuff with the Native American characters and the way they interact with Mulder and Scully isn't so successful. I think they do deal with it in quite, as I said, broad strokes. It's like, we don't like these outsiders coming into our town, and just some cliched stuff, some on the nose dialogue, and overall I don't think there's a lot of thought that has gone into the plot. Really, there's some bad acting. I think the Lyle character, who's like the brother who's been bitten, essentially. I think he's a really bad actor, and I think he has some generic lines. There's a line with him and Scully where he says, do you ever get the fear, basically? And she's like, the fear, and it's hammered home to a ridiculous extent. But that's the setup of the episode. There's actually some pretty good practical effects. I think this is the sort of episode where it's conscious of like cutting around things because they are on a very limited budget. And I felt that in the opening scene, although the opening scene, I guess, does a decent job of setting up some mystery and intrigue. I think, well, not that much. You sort of know what territory, but I guess just in the sense that they don't actually show you much. But I think I just felt that a little bit in that scene because they were obviously doing all this in shadows at night to try and conceal the fact that probably their effects aren't very good. Although there's a really good practical effect later on in the episode. But before I talk a bit more about it, let's hear a bit from Fox Mulder in this scene where he's gonna describe the plot for us.
A true piece of history, Scully. The very first X-File, initiated by J. Edgar Hoover himself in 1946. During World War II, a series of murders occurred in and around the Northwest, 7 here in Browning alone. Each victim was basically ripped to shreds and eaten as if by a wild animal. However, many of the victims were found at home, as if they allowed their killer to enter. In 1946, police cornered what they believed to be such an animal in a cabin in Glacier National Park. They shot it, but when they went in to retrieve the carcass, they found only the body of Richard Watkins.
Sounds like the Parker scenario.
The murder stopped that year. Because the cases were unsolved and considered so bizarre, Hoover locked them away, hoping that in time people around here would forget about them.
This file indicates that they started again in 1954.
In 59, 64, 78, and now again in 94. But
Here it comes.
these Animal Man-related murders predate the oldest X-File by 150 years. Members of the Lewis and Clark expedition wrote of Indian men who could change their shape into that of a wolf.
Mulder, what this folder describes is called lycanthropy. It's a type of insanity in which an individual believes that he can turn into a wolf. I mean, no one can physically change into an animal.
Ah, Scully. Scully. In denial as always. And let's deal with that scene. First of all, the introduction of what supposedly was the first ever X-Files. J. Edgar Hoover referenced them, which is quite a nice touch considering his history with the FBI and stuff. So maybe it's not too far-fetched and he could conceivably be involved in that sort of case, the original X-File. But it's just quite a plodding on the nose scene that feels like a big exposition dump. I think, yeah, it feels too much like Mulder's story time. It's not one of those really meaty back and forth Mulder and Dana scenes. I don't know why I said the names that way around, but and the thing is, Anderson looks kind of bored with it, and that's maybe the key. Anderson looks bored. Scully looks bored because that's the character, but normally Gillian Anderson, she's such a good actress, then even if the material's a bit crap, she can kind of rise to the challenge. But even then, it's like she's just going through the motions, which is something you'll see very little of during her run on the X-Files. But yeah, she literally looked bored along with the rest of us. And again, the end stuff with her coming up, it's some sort of psychological disorder that they believe they're werewolves. Well, I guess you could say that about anything in a sense, any sort of like mental illness. But the trouble is, considering the evidence we've already seen in the episode and the evidence we're still going to see later in the episode, the fact that she's sort of making these lame possibilities, excuses, and theories just makes it even worse. It makes her look weaker, because at this stage in the X-Files she has proven that she can believe. And the thing is, a lot of times in the past, even if it turns out that Scully's wrong in what she believes has happened, she still comes up with a credible sort of alternative. She still comes up with something you can kind of say, okay, I can see what she's going at. But here it just feels like plain denial, and it's one of those rare Mulder and Scully scenes that I find to be sort of quite boring. It's almost like she is rolling her eyes, but yeah, then she's kind of bored. But yeah. So the drama between them in this episode isn't that sharp, and it's not the best episode for Mulder and Scully. I think the highlight of the episode, alongside some solid practical effects, is Michael Horse, his character, the sheriff of the town, who acts as sort of like a buffer, like between the two factions. He's almost in between. He's obviously their point of contact, and he's very cynical of the FBI as well. And he introduces this idea of like they only really get in touch, or they only really visit once something like this happens. They're not really in touch with the local community or their issues. So he introduces some very credible ideas. But I think also because Horse is just a really good grounded actor. And I think his character, unlike some of the other Native American characters in this, he does feel like he has a bit of meat to him. He does feel like this guy who's really conflicted. It's almost like he wants to help Mulder and Scully, and he wants to get to the bottom of the investigation, but at the same time he's torn. His loyalties are torn. And I think Horse, who of course is best known for Twin Peaks, for Agent Hawk in Twin Peaks, is brilliant in that. I think he does bring some weight to that and to the conflict, and he actually doesn't give Mulder and Scully an easy time at first. But he's also very fair. It's not like he's letting his bias towards his culture, if you like, get in the way. I think he does sort of call a spade, if you like. So there's some good scenes with him. I think his performance and that character is definitely the highlight of the episode. By the end, there's sort of a begrudging respect between him and the agents. There's some other like melodrama that goes on with Gwen, the sister of the Native American who's accused of the crime, and at one point it hints that she might be carrying out some sort of vigilante revenge mission, that because she's in the bloodline, as they use, that she can, she inherits this ability which is passed down through Native American law, and that she actually carries out a revenge plot at some point. It's never totally confirmed, and we're sort of left with not quite everything being resolved, but that's certainly the indication that maybe she changes a bit later and acts out revenge, but she doesn't stick around long. And again, some of her stuff I wasn't so keen on. I thought that was a bit weak, and the actress wasn't the best. I think Michael Horse as the sheriff definitely the highlight of the episode, and certainly later on when Lyle changes, I think I do like those effects. They look pretty fleshy and convincing. There's one or two other moments that are a bit weak. So overall, I'll give the episode 5 out of 10. I think it's a really down the middle sort of episode. On the whole, it kind of bored me, maybe just because I've seen this sort of thing done before, done much better. But it's an okay episode. It's kind of very watchable, and it has its moments. But overall, not a great X-Files episode in my opinion. But there's my thoughts on Shapes. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe. You can also ding the bell on YouTube, which will notify you if I go live on a live stream or if I release another video online. So next week I'll be looking at in the dark, or in darkness, I should say, from the X-Files, which has a similar feel to Ice, except it's in a forest. So that'll be the review for next week. Thanks, guys. Take care. See you again soon. Goodbye.